Your time is limited. Don't waste it living someone else's life. Steve Jobs. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I am your host, Shamiza Ali. Our topic tonight is the challenges facing the sugar industry and GAWU'S role in helping to make the industry solvent. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by Coordinating Council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, the Caribbean, and Guyana. Funding support is by well-known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Please welcome my moderator for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh.
Thank you very much, Shamisa, and welcome to our viewers.
Our panelists tonight are Dr. Ganga Ramdas and Professor Muniram Budu will join us shortly.
Hello,
Our
everyone.
guest tonight is the General Secretary of GAWU, Mr. Aslim Singh. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Good night. And
Hi.
thanks for having me again.
Good evening.
All right. All right. Good evening. We are very pleased to have with us the General Secretary of the General Agricultural and General Workers Union of Guyana. I know I saw a report in today's, I don't know, there's a press release from GAWU saying that your president, Mr. C. Paul Narayan, was in Geneva, Switzerland at the labor convention. He was accompanied by other officials from the Ministry of Labor and from the some is it the Chamber of Commerce and Industry?
No, it's the
I believe that. Yeah.
KG, the Consultative Association of Guyanese
Oh,
Industry.
KG, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So all right. So I want to, before we start, I want to ask you a few basic questions about the sugar industry, which a lot of people. But before we go, is your union now only representing sugar workers, or you represent workers in other industries? And if you can name those industries.
Okay, sure. So before answering your question directly, Dr. Singh, Dr. Ramdas, and Ms. Ali, I think I want to thank you on behalf of GAU for having us again. I think it's about just about a year ago that I appeared on behalf of the union on your program. And certainly we're happy to once again appear and contribute to the dialogue and the good work you and your colleagues have been doing in not only educating Guyanese at home, but Guyanese in the diaspora and further afield of what's taking place. And just maybe a bit of clarity, Mr. Narayan, the union's president, Mr. Sipal Narayan, is attending the ILO, the International Labour Organization's annual conference in Geneva as the representative of the workers of Guyana. So it's how the ILO works. It's a tripartite arrangement, employers, workers, and the government. So the representatives from all three bodies attending, and Mr. Narayan is using the opportunity to advance the interests of not only the Guyanese workers, but the workers of the world generally. But coming back to your question, Dr. Singh, no, GAU is not confined mainly to the sugar industry. We do have a large proportion of our membership being drawn from the sugar industry, and we're now at. I mean, I should offer this distinguishment that we're representing workers at three different levels in the sugar industry as well. More recently, at the senior staff managerial level. But apart from the sugar industry per se, or more specifically, GAU has broadened its membership beyond that in the areas of fishing, rice, forestry, the transportation sector, clerical distilling, beverage manufacturing. And so, we're not a union specifically confined to sugar, but we have gone into several other areas and representing workers in a host of different industries and enterprises, both in the private and public sector.
Mhm. All right. Let's go back to some basic data in the sugar industry. Before the four sugar estates were closed in 2015, 2016, how many workers were employed
All right. So,
by the GAO?
Well, it's actually 2016, 2017. In Wales at the end of 2016, and then Skeldon, Rose, and East Demerara at the end of 2017. Prior to the closure,
Mm.
taking into account what they call temporary workers who are not yet confirmed employees in the sugar industry, there's a period of probation. There are about closer to 18, 19,000 workers who were employed in the industry across the then 7 states. That also includes, of
In,
course, the guys who head office.
okay, and after the closure of these four sugar estates, how many workers
Um,
remain?
the official figures have been touted to be around 7,000, but what is not including the official figures, I think, and I think myself, you had this conversation before, are the large number of temporary workers who were released because they hadn't had a year's service as yet. In Guyana, as you may know, in order to receive terminal benefits, one has to work a year or more. So a large number of temporary workers were released or were not provided the opportunity to continue to work in the industry, and therefore they were not counted among those who were severed or terminated or made redundant. Rather, I shouldn't say terminated, but their jobs were made redundant and they were severed, and
Mhm.
that was a journey in itself, a struggle. And then you also had instances where some workers who becoming fearful and anxious of what is going to actually depart the industry in that time. So it could be closer, from our estimates, around 9 to 10,000 workers who were made jobless or who lost their jobs in the sugar industry because of the policies to minimize the industry in the
Mhm.
2015-2020 period.
Okay, and so right now, how many workers are employed in the sugar industry?
Of course, it varies in between the crop and the in crop and out of crop period. In the in crop period, you can have around 8,000, 8,500, maybe even some weeks peaking at 9,000. It very much
Hmm.
depends on where you are in the year. Now it's the out of crop period. The, they're not as much many workers at work. Of course, the availability of workers is also limited because you're not in the full production mode per se.
Hmm. The um, before I put you on to Professor Budun and Dr. Ganga, let me ask you a final, not a final, a comment before I pass you on to them. The state of machinery, equipment, and factory, um, I know they were left to run down and like Wales was cannibalized, etc. But what's the current status? I noticed that iFlood, for example, got a special award for meeting and iFlood was one of the estate had serious problems with the factory. So it
Right.
appears that that problem was
Yeah, I think, as you rightly said, iFlood has seen an improvement in its performance in recent years. Both, I think, in the field and the factory. iFlood did have some factory problems. There's been, with the support of government of Guyana, um, a bit more focused intervention in the factories. Of course, a
yeah,
lot
yeah.
of intervention, a lot of attention was paid initially to the field situation to improve cane supply, cane productivity, and cane production. But now I think a greater focus is being, not to say that the fields are being ignored, but there's also greater focus being paid on the factories, how to improve the factories, how to improve the efficiency. Um, as you would recognize, in when the industry was miniaturized in the 2015-2020 period, the industry was starved of a lot of capital investment, a lot of programs that were planned, a lot of initiatives that were in the pipeline were not pursued. I mean, one of the ones that strikes me immediately, you speak of machinery. Prior to the change in government in 2015, the then Donald Ramatara government had secured a loan from the Caribbean Development Bank to advance mechanization of a number of the estates. I remember, and more to some extent, and then beginning work in the Borbis estates where some challenges were being recognized. When the government changed, although the Commission of Inquiry, which was set up by the former coalition government, recommended that the loan be utilized for the purposes, it was never utilized. So it placed it stymied the industry's progress, and then the continued starvation, the continued using, for the after lack of a better word, malice towards the industry, prevented a lot of critical works from being addressed. So it did have an impact, and it snowballed into some of the situations we still face today and still are seeking to correct.
Dr. Ganga,
Oh,
you have a follow-up question?
well, thanks very much for the update. And I was disappointed to know that they took the loan and didn't purchase the appropriate equipment. So mechanization would definitely be helpful in the process of production.
Mhm.
I looked at some of the 2022 annual report, and I tried to picture what's happening in the industry. So I've looked at it and said, look, there are many moving parts, and we need to look at the entire Gaisuko as a set of cost centers. And there are seven that I identified, starting with production, marketing, distribution, and then management of equipment, and then people, and so on. So the challenge how do you see the challenge, the main challenge for Gaisuko at this point in time?
There's several challenges. I think there's been an effort to improve, like I said, pay attention in the fields. I mean, you have outlined seven cost centers from your own analysis. I am aware that Gaisuku, in its own management structure, has even gone into a much more deeper analysis, trying to analyze it by the specific, because the field operations, for instance, are made up of several even greater among the moving parts at the factory, and they've begun to analyze it, even the different planting, tillage, crop husbandry, cane transport, etc. In the field, in the factory, there are similar areas where they look at where efficiencies can be had and that sort of thing. So there is, I think, an effort to look at what is taking place and how you can improve production and productivity. Just a little bit of correction. It's not an instance where the loan was taken and utilized to purchase incorrect equipment. Rather, the then, or the former government, the coalition government, never pursued the agreement. So I don't think the loan was ever taken whatsoever, and to the detriment of the industry. Of course, one of the major things in the field is to improve efficiency. Workers have gravitated towards semi-mechanization in the harvesting of canes, for instance, or in planting. There's also full mechanization taking place parallel to that. So there is that taking place in an effort to improve the field output and field costs. Co- Concomitant with that is some modifications required in the factories to handle mechanized types of cane, because that they come with a different condition sometimes, depending on the weather we have here.
Yeah, so to summarize as a whole, the challenge facing Gaisuko is how to achieve lower cost of production, average cost of production in the long run. Because currently, the world market price is lower than our average cost of production. You will agree with that, right?
But I mean, while the world market price serves as a price floor, I mean, guys, so could the market, the markets it access is, they are selling sugar about, depending on the market, so to some extent even higher than that. But guys, it was also repositioning itself. I see under the new CE, and I heard him last week speaking to the cane harvesters, rather, the there was a ceremony to award the most productive cane harvesters across the industry during the forest crop, about the reorientation of the industry to produce higher value products. A lot of emphasis is being placed on packaged sugar. At Blairmont, that is being done. Of course, you may know at Enmore, there was a packaging plant established there. That unfortunately was closed when that estate was shuttered in 2017. and efforts are now being made to have a packaging plant established at Albion, to improve one the product offering and quality, but also to attract higher prices for the industry. But yes, it doesn't negate the reality that there needs to be an effort, and I think that this concomitant efforts to also reduce, as you said, the average cost of production over the long term. And there are a number of efforts I recognize that we recognize that they are pursuing. Like, as I said, mechanization holds a lot of potential. Use of higher value or higher yielding canes. They're now pursuing newer varieties with international and regional collaboration, and even greater use of technology. For instance, the industry is now moving to drones, to the application of chemicals, and may look at it in the future for fertilization of canes as a means to improve efficiency in those areas of work, all within the broader context of reducing costs, while on the other hand, improving or maximizing revenues.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense, but the basic idea is how to increase the number of hectares of production of sugarcane. Without the
Well,
sugarcane, we wouldn't be able
well,
to
of,
make
of,
sugar.
of course. I mean, and there's a very popular saying in the sugar industry here, sugar is made in the field and recovered in the factory. So, I mean, I don't necessarily share the view that it must come with an increase in hectarage. But I think what we need to improve is the yield per hectare to one, get a higher productivity per unit of land. And therefore, we can, because if we have cultivation within manageable areas where we're getting higher levels of productivity, where we can do more intensive agriculture, then that is one measure that where you can also serve to reduce costs.
So what I've noticed is that you have estate cultivation, and then
Mhm.
you have private farmers cultivation. So
Right.
in Albion and Iflock, you have a few. You have one co-op and two private farmers, and then Iflock you have, I think, one major private farmer there, or two.
No,
So
sorry.
I'm thinking that in order to get output volumes at a higher level, in order to experience economies of scale, you need to increase the number of farmers, private farmers, and that would be a way to solve some of the inherent problems. What you
Um,
say?
well, okay. I mean, there's an argument for cane farmers in the industry. And the presence of cane farmers in Gaisuku and in the sugar industry predates even independence in Guyana. It's incidental to know that private cane farming was first established at Wales, prior to independence in the days of Bocuse. Wales was an estate which was approximately 50%, depending on the crop, sometimes 60% supplied by farmers. When Wales was closed, there were over 1,000 farmers, small and medium scale, some a bit more, maybe in the larger scale, but primarily small and medium scale farmers who were cultivating canes at Wales, and that were supplying to that factory. In fact, when the essay was closed in 2016, there was a promise by the then government to have a road constructed from linking Wales to Iflot. Um, for those of you who may know Wales, Wales, the farmers there did not use the pont means of transportation, or the or barges. I mean, I don't know who I'm familiar with the terminology of ponds, but the barges, as guys do, but they transported via tractors. The apparatus from Wales was moved to the Iflot factory in anticipation of the road. The road was never built, and many of those farmers eventually, um, by virtue of necessity, moved away from farming. President Ali recently, I think, if not early this year, sometime later last year, did commit that work will be done with Guy Suku and the farmers or former farmers of Wales to seek to revitalize their cultivation and to build that long promised link between Wales and Iflot as a means to get those farmers back into the cane farming business. You're right. At Albion, I think it's a much more. I think there are a few farmers. I don't know the exact specific number. At Ifla, there's a large area of cultivation that is being farmed or planted by farmers. Some of the farmers did fall on some hard times, and I know the government and guys who are working with them to see what they can do to assist them in order to revitalize their farms. So there's some element of that. So it is, I think, a work in progress. But I think there needs to be some level of investment to maybe help these farmers to get on board as well.
Okay, let's move on to Professor Budu. Welcome, sir, and over to you, to Mr.
Yeah,
Aslim.
my connection is acting up.
All
Okay,
of us.
yeah, Mr. Singh, what specifically has GAWU done in say the last 5 years to improve the lives of sugar workers?
I mean, of course, our role is confined to the improving the welfare of workers. I mean, one of the significant achievements, and you've narrowed it down to the last 5 years. A major achievement we had in last year, where we were able, for the first time since GAWU was recognized in 1976, to secure a 3-year pay rise agreement with Gaisuku. So last year the workers enjoyed 10% this year, 8, and then next year 9 percentage increase. So the workers have now been assured over between last year and the next year, last year, this year, and next year, certainty in their pay rises over that. So there is some level of planning they can make. It's not limited only to that. That's a major highlight. But of course, we've now gotten there's now a commitment sometime to be done sometime during this year to increase the minimum wage in the sugar industry to $100,000. That is something, again, to help the sugar workers improve their lives. And we have been able to negotiate new incentives, new production incentives. So the workers have certain production targets, depending on what type of job you do: weeding, fertilizing, planting, cane harvesting, and so on. We've been able to negotiate improved benefits in that area. So so there are a number of efforts be it to improve workers' welfare through increased income, through representation, through looking at benefits, but even advocating on our general advocacy on workers' behalf, looking at things like taxes, the child care grant, which was introduced this year in the budget, for instance, has long been championed by GAWU, and FITTER, of which we are an affiliate. So there are a number of things GAWU represents, which we do at the bargaining table, but we recognize has to be taken up at a different table.
Now, you have just mentioned about productivity.
Mhm.
What specific interventions or recommendations you make to Gaisuko or the government as a whole to improve productivity?
I mean, we have made certain and in our discussions with guys, we don't negotiate with the government directly. Our relationship is confined within our agreement with Gaisuku, and we will make recommendations. On, for example, one of the things our shop stewards do at different times during the crop would to visit the fields, for instance, visit the cultivations. They'll be able to identify areas where improvements can be had, or where that there may be need for corrective works, as a means to ensure that there's adequate supply of canes, weeds, and vines, and these things, are minimize these irritants, these what they call obstacles in the sugar industry. How we even to how we utilize the machines, how we how the crops, for instance, are planned. And so there's this consistent dialogue. This is more at the local estate level and at the central level. Of course, the central offices of the union are involved in these field visits from time to time. And we're able to share ideas both with Gaisuku's management at the estate level and at the head office level, in an effort to collaborate and work together to improve both production and productivity.
Your neighbor, Brazil, is the major sugar producer. And I think they produce sugar at about 16 cents a pound. Guyana is about $1.31 per pound. That's some
Well,
information.
yeah, I mean,
Is that correct?
I'm not certain about the Ghana figure, neither the Brazil figure. A lot of figures have been touted as to what is Ghana's production cost and Brazil's production cost. Of course, we also kind of fail to take into account in Brazil as well. I mean, while there is public policy support to the sugar industry in Brazil as well. Research and a lot of these things are done through public policy, public institutions rather. For For instance, I know Gaisuku is working with one of the Brazilian universities dedicated to sugar research and seeking to propagate a certain type of cane which they've been testing. So I'm not sure if Brazil is actually 16 cents. You also have to bear in mind that Brazil's factories are designed in such a way because they have a long-standing ethanol policy that they're flexible, so they can switch between ethanol and sugar depending on the price in either, depending on rather the market conditions in either market. So of course, Brazil is, like you said, the largest producer in the world. They produce millions of tons of sugar. We are very much in a different category when contrasted with Brazil.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think there's a lot of learning that we can have from countries like Brazil. They've had tremendous experience and tremendous success, and I think there are efforts know under the new leadership of Waisuku to seek to work with the Brazilians in trying to emulate some of their practices here.
Yeah, I understand that you guys are now introducing mechanization in the sugar industry. Assuming
Well, that's true. Mechanization is not a new feature per se. There's, I think, a greater emphasis on mechanization, but mechanization has been tried in different degrees over the years. Some with not so much success as the others, but mechanization, for instance, there's been semi mechanization of cane harvesting for many years now, several decades now. Fully mechanization of cane harvesting, it's a bit newer, and now they're now looking at planting, full mechanization of planting. They've been semi mechanization of planting for a few years as well, and looking at now fertilization and stuff like that. What are the new methods rather that can be used in these sort of areas of the operations?
So is this new variety of sugarcane are going to be more yield more? Is that what you're trying to do?
I think the yield is one parameter they're looking at, but also its suitability for mechanization. One of the important elements for mechanized friendly cane, it should be erect as possible to allow the machine to operate unimpeded and without much hiccup. So I mean, it's a process. It goes back to the field layouts, making sure the fields are laid out in a proper manner, leveled, and have adequate gradient for drainage and these sort of things because of our own soil conditions and weather conditions here. So it's not just a yield parameter being looked at that's important, but there are other elements that I think has to be taken on board.
Now, assuming that you're going to make some more rapid pace in mechanization, is there any attempt to help the sugar workers and their families wean them out into other industry rather than sugar? Because there are a lot of opportunities in Guyana that sugar workers can fill. In fact, I know we had the minister of the Ben was on here some time ago, and we talked about a police force, and some sugar workers can go and do police work, with training.
Well, I mean, as you said, the labor market has changed a lot in recent times in Ghana. I think, there are opportunities in several different sectors, and you mentioned a few just now. But I mean, even in sugar now, the characteristic of a sugar worker is also changing. You're now moving to a more highly skilled worker who is involved in mechanization or operating these bigger machines and the different paraphernalia that go along with them. Even using now technologies, drones for the application of fertilizer, well, not fertilizers yet, but chemicals and eventually fertilizers, mechanized planting machines, operating the cane loaders. So I think the character of a sugar worker is also changing. While yes, some they may not be a one-to-one replacement in the future, given what's taking place in the broader labor market. You'll see the character of, I think, sugar workers, or what is deemed as sugar working, and it's changing over time.
Now, what do you think is the future of the Guyana sugar industry, given that there's so much vagaries in sugar production and the market, for example? A lot of subsidy given by government. For example, you mentioned Brazil, but I know the U.S. gives something like $4 billion in the U.S. and they control the market.
Yeah, in fact, a World Bank report a few years ago has said that there was no sugar industry in the world that doesn't receive any form of subsidy.
Mhm.
There's some form of subsidy. As you mentioned, the big United States, the
Mhm.
Europeans, it's the same thing. The
Mhm.
Australians, those in Thailand, and
Mhm.
who we tend to look up to as the big brothers in sugar.
Mhm.
So yeah, there is a lot of subsidization, and a lot of this goes unheard of, sometimes in
Mhm.
our local discourse, that
Mhm.
it's something unique to Ghana. Obviously, as you point out, it's far from the situation in Ghana is far from unique, and there are other. I mean, like in the US and elsewhere, sugar is seen as beyond its economic contribution alone to what socially and its impact on the wider communities where it's cultivated.
Mhm.
Similarly here, so but I think when we look at the future of sugar, I think we have an opportunity we still, I think, the largest regional producer in the CARICOM region. We do have the protection of the CET,
Mhm.
and we have the opportunity of a large market in sugar, both on the raw sugar level and on the refined sugar. I think more on the refined sugar. I think the last report I saw in the CARICOM region, the region rather imports about 200,000 tons of white sugar annually, which can be produced in Guyana and be exported and be covered by the CET. So I know Guysugo is also looking at a first stage industrial type white sugar rather than the consumer type white sugar, with the intention to go to a full consumer tabletop white sugar, maybe over the medium term. So, and I do recall the president announcing, I don't know, President Ali announcing a few months ago that the government was looking, or there was an investor rather who expressed interest in setting up a refinery. I think at the former Enmore factory. I'm not sure at what stage is that discussion is. So there is an opportunity here. I mean, within the Caribbean, just looking at it in the Caribbean context, not taking into account even the diaspora in the New York, the Toronto, and Florida, and the other parts of North America and beyond that.
All right. Shamisa, do we take a break now?
Yes, we can take a break now. We'll
Yeah.
be right back after these messages. Welcome
All
back
right.
to the Ghana Dialogue. Go ahead,
All
Dr.
right. Thank you.
Tara.
Yeah. Some time ago, couple months ago, the president announced that perhaps Gaisuko should look for partners in the sugar industry, to have partnership, a private-public arrangement. I don't know how that is feasible, but do you see any prospect on that?
I think it's happening to some extent. A public-private, maybe not in the what we see in the traditional sense of it, but there is involvement of the private sector. For instance, the emphasis on mechanization in the fields. A lot of the actual work is being done by the private sector under a contractual arrangement, um, producing, or rather converting, should say producing, but converting lands which were formerly manually harvested and um, manually cultivated lands to a more mechanized friendly, because
Mm,
um, for those of you who are familiar with sugar cultivation, the fields are quite short. To take into account the distances workers would have to walk or traverse to in engaging the various tasks in the sugar fields. Mechanized operation, on the other hand, requires a much longer field to to facilitate the machines operating in an efficient and effective manner. So there is that effort. I mean, apart from the conversion, private individuals, private enterprises have been involved in harvesting, the mechanized harvesting of cane, because
Mhm.
there's still a deficiency within the Gaisuku itself to have sufficient machinery to be engaged in the harvesting of canes. Gaisuku is addressing those deficits, but in the meantime, um, bridging that shortfall, so to speak, with the help of the private sector.
So you're not talking about joint ventures.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's flourished to that point as yet. Maybe we will get there. I think I think the idea which I just spoke about, the refinery and more, may see a sort of joint venture sort of operation. Because the raw sugar obviously will have to be the joint venture partner, the private sector partner will not have raw sugar. That will have to be secure from guys who it may involve some sort of joint venture arrangement. I mean, I'm not privy to those discussions. I'm being speculative here, and I don't want to
Mhm.
prejudice those. But we may see that happening as other efforts have been done to diversify the industry away from being a traditional raw bulk sugar producer to a more um, secondary, well, maybe not in secondary, but tertiary markets, more and more into higher level types of products.
Okay, when these four sugar factories were closed, the workers who were laid off, they were subsequently given sums of money, but the cane farmers, many of them who had laborers working with them, they were not given anything.
No,
Can you say why?
well, remember here in Guyana, the law is, and the collective agreement with the union provides benefits on termination or redundancy. In this instance, when the estates were closed, these jobs were made redundant because the estate no longer existed, and by to that extent that the job no longer existed, so they were entitled to severance. Um, on the other hand, the cane farmers were engaged; they had a contractual arrangement with Gaisuku, and they as per the Cane Farming Act, they were not entitled or receive any compensation. And the laborers, by virtue of that, also, I don't know, I do know that in many instances, the Gaisuku workers would also assist in the instance of some cane farmers in the harvesting of their cane. So they lost many of the workers who were employed by the farmers were also employed by Gaisuku. Not to say that is not to say that every worker who worked with a cane farmer was a guy super employee. I don't know the proportions that they were, but no, they did not receive them because I think of the nature of the arrangement between Gaisuku and the cane farmers. The employees of the cane farmers were not considered employees of Gaisuku, but rather they were employees
Well,
of the cane farmers.
well, that's the case. Like in Wales, as
Mhm,
you've said, 40-50% of the cane was
mhm,
by cane farmers. I know one cane farmer, one of the largest in Wales area, Pradeep,
mhm,
had over 30 workers working with him. He had trailers, tractors, a whole set of equipment. And when the factory closed, most of these workers had to be laid off because he had focused so heavily on sugarcane. Prior to
mhm,
that, he was doing big farming, like pineapple, citrus fruits, etc. He moved away to that to cane, and so all these workers were left stranded. But he had to abandon much of his vehicle. Some of them he managed to get rid of.
mhm,
I think he still got a few to work on his. He still had part of his farm going. So that's why I asked you the question because now the other thing is that people have been worried about the sugar industry being subsidized to the tune of about 5 to 6 billion a year for the next couple of years, 10 years or so. And as you rightly said, there's no sugar industry in the world that is not being subsidized by the government. Um, but Gaisuko the sugar industry earned through the tax levy from 1976 to 2000 over $30 billion. And those funds were never plowed back into the sugar industry to modernize the sugar industry or for any diversification program. Now, the 76 to 2000, that's how much, 24 years, and that money that should legitimately the unions or the workers have deserved a part of that, which the PNC government we told you know they had strike, etc. about that. But what I'm saying is for 24 years, over 24 years, they have been taking away money from the workers, and that money used to really belong to the sugar worker, most of it. So if the government subsidized sugar workers by $6 billion a year, I don't understand why people are complaining because bauxite industry is being subsidized by 4 billion, and on a per capita basis for worker, bauxite is being subsidized at a higher rate.
Mhm.
And but I would not say that the government should stop subsidizing the industry. Industry is too linked. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go for productivity and increase production, etc. But I'm also saying that any kind of subsidy that is demanded, that is warranted, should be given because this is an industry linked historically, emotionally. It's a community-based industry, just like bauxite. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, and I agree. I mean, I've endorsed what you're saying. I mean, I want to put it in the context. In 1992, the last budget prior to the PPP coming into office in 1992, the sugar levy represented 25% of that year's budget. So the point I'm making, it demonstrated this significant and massive contribution of the sugar industry to the national economy in its better days. And as you see, you quoted whatever so many $1 billion. In fact, we had adjusted it for taking into account inflation between 76 and 2000. And it's quite well over $100 billion when you take into account inflation over those years, because there were periods of high levels of inflation in Ghana when there is devaluation and whatnot. But even disregarding that, there was a massive and significant contribution, not only by the levy, and the levy which we can probably quantify very easily, but even the drainage of many of the villages on the coastal plain, that was sustained by sugar. The community centers, the health centers, many roads in the area, and so many sporting facilities and other things that was sustained by the sugar industry and contributed not only to the sugar workers or the people who worked within the industry, but to the wider communities. So, it's easy to seek to express criticism of support to sugar without taking the historical element. But more than that, when the former coalition government in 2000, I remember the 31st of December 2016, called us to meet with them at the Ministry of Agriculture. Then Minister of State Joe Harmon led the delegation and announced to the unions, this is the GAWU, NASI, and the GLU, and the then opposition PPPC, which was then led, their delegation was now led by now President Ali, and what they wanted to close the three more estates. This is coming a few weeks after when former President Granger saying that he was of the view that Wales would have been the first and only closure of estates, of course, betraying another promise they made. But I remember in those engagements, the first one in the 1st of December 2016, and then this the second one, and I remember the date, 3rd of February 2017. And in that on that occasion, then Vice President Ramjatan led the delegation. And both GAU and now President Ali were very firm that any closure or any consideration of closure has to take into account the socioeconomic implications. And both the union and the PPP um, articulated that a socioeconomic study be done. And I remember Ramjatan telling us that if you want to study, you go do it yourself. We are prepared to close. And we got GAU eventually got the support of the International Labour Organization to do that study. And it confirmed, I think, what we all said would have happened. It confirmed how people lives were made worse off. In fact, six person's income declined by as much as 70%. Things like domestic violence, suicide, alcoholism, drug abuse, they're all skyrocketed in these communities. It speaks about the integral and the linkages they have, how the village economy collapsed. I remember the University of Warwick doing a pictorial essay of sorts, visiting these communities in the post-closure period and looking at the empty markets, looking at how workers, some who had started building their homes, were no longer able to complete it because the income had evaporated. I remember in Skellen, for instance, where workers hadn't money to eat and were fishing in the back down of the closed estate cultivation, and the NISL, which had then taken over the estate, began to charge the workers, demand a fee for them to enter the back dam in order to obtain fish in order to catch the fish so they and their families can eat. So it's there's a lot of criticism about what sugar receives, but there's not this cognizance, so to speak, of what sugar has done and continues to do. I mean, the best training school in the Caribbean, technical training college in the Caribbean, is Guy Suku's Training Center at Port Moran. It's produced thousands of artisans who have not only impacted Guyana but have gone in North America and elsewhere and have held senior and high level positions. Some of them even being their own business owners. So these are all tangible contributions that we can point to from the sugar industry. And but I think there's a lot of politicking and a lot of obscuring the facts when it comes to sugar for certain narratives.
Mm. All right, Dr. Ganga, over to you. You have 3 minutes. Dr. Ganga.
I think it's
Dr.
muted.
Ganga, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm looking at the basics, and the whole idea is how do we avoid closing the remaining 4 estates? And in order to tackle that challenge, we need to look at production. So I'll deal with that in a second. I just want to put some praise for mechanized planting and fertilizing. We have accomplished much in that area, as you mentioned. But land preparation is still lacking. We have the old cambered bed type, which needs to be converted into flat beds so that the harvesting machinery, the correct harvesting machine, not tractors. We have the 5 Bueller tractors there that are messing up things when we could have chosen the chopper billet system as they use in Australia and in Florida and so forth.
No,
So
but
the
sorry to
choice of
interject.
the
Sorry to interject.
choice of equipment.
But that's what we're using. We're using the chopper harvesters here.
Oh,
That's what we're using.
so
And
where the
and
these
the cambered beds. As I was saying to Dr. Singh when we were speaking about the private-public sort of partnership, those cambered beds are being converted into the flat, longer type beds to facilitate the use of the chopper harvesters, the bell loaders or the cane loaders, the planting machines, the fertilizing machines, even the chemical applicators.
but you mentioned some deficiency in mechanization
But
process.
what I mentioned, I articulated from the context of insufficient. It's a process. So one, it takes time to convert land and have it planted, and then also the machinery to do the different operations. So there is an effort by Gaisuku to begin to procure some of the equipment. Of course, it will take time. Money is not unlimited. Resources aren't unlimited. So it's a work in progress, and they're trying to mitigate that to some extent by involving the private sector.
Well, that is welcome. So now, if we this in the current year, if we target 15 metric tons of sugar, that would require, in terms of sugar cane, about, let's say, about 60,000 tons of metric tons of sugar cane. Is that level of output sufficient to experience economies of scale for Gaisuko to achieve low cost production?
No, I think I agree with you there, and we agree with you there that the, there's an important need, and I think there's an emphasis on increasing productivity and production, because I think they have to be looked at hand in hand.
Yes.
And one of the things that happened last year, because of the drought conditions that prevailed in the earlier part of the first half of last year, Gaisuku was able to do a lot of land preparation, conversion, both land preparation and conversion, and we were able to plant a lot of canes. The unfortunate thing this year that happened, the rains lasted longer in the beginning part of the year. The January, February rains lasted a bit into March, and came earlier than the usual May, June period we're accustomed to. It's coming to maybe around mid-April. So the ideal cropping window was shortened. As you would recognize, using mechanized type of operations requires certain type of weather condition. And what we saw during the dry days, I did see Mr. Paul Chung, the now CEO of Gaisuku, articulating the number of wet days versus dry days in the crop. And that's an important element to take into account when you come to mechanization. The availability, not the availability of the machines, but the ability of the machines to work in the conditions. So what has happened though, some amount of canes which were to be harvested in this crop that was recently concluded will have to be harvested in the next crop, unfortunately, because they could not have been able to reap it out because of
All
the
right.
onset of the
All right,
rain.
Dr. Ganga, your last point.
So we hope to make up in the autumn crop. You have spring and autumn crop. So
Right. So I mean,
we
what you
fell
have,
down.
unfortunately, though, because some of the canes have gone beyond maturity, you may have some diminishing returns. I mean, to what extent? I won't be able to tell you that. I mean, guys will probably be better able than I to say that, but there will be some diminishing returns in our own experience.
All right, Dr. Budu, Professor Budu,
Mhm.
you have 3 minutes, sir.
So, Singh, the sugar industry has been at the whims of political parties who win power. The last uh, government want to kill the industry. This government is resuscitating it now, and they've been questioned. I know Dr. Singh raised the issue about subsidies, and I mentioned to you that I've seen or investigated who's giving subsidies, and nearly all countries are giving subsidies. And I mentioned the U.S. gave about 4 billion to the sugar industry, and even Brazil is giving a lot of subsidies. What does a solvent, profitable, and sustainable sugar industry look to GAWU?
What do you mean? What, are you asking whether that's possible, or are you asking? Or
If what is possible and what you think is needed
I
to
mean, I
make
think
this industry
I
solvent
mean,
and
and
sustainable.
this is guys Gau's position
Mm.
since 2000, even prior to that, but it was articulated more firmly during the period of the coalition, especially during the period of closure. We have said the sugar industry has to be looked at from a sugar cane, from not only as mere sugar alone, but looking at it from a sugar cane industry, and looking to use the byproducts of sugar being a product of an industry that produces other products. We maybe need to look at ethanol, for instance, whether that's feasible in the context of now electric cars and natural gas coming into play, but maybe cogeneration, white sugar, packaged sugar. How maybe we can use the industry's bagasse. For I saw in Brazil they're using bagasse now to produce in road construction. Could we borrow that, given the heavy emphasis on road construction in Guyana, to use the sugar industry's bagasse as a substitute for certain other materials? So there are possibilities of look, even if not ethanol, there's a possibility of alcohol, and the whole historical link between sugar and rum in Guyana. So they are, I think, different avenues industry can pursue, and that, I think, places the industry in a much stronger footing in its journey to solvency.
Yeah, because there's a lot of byproduct or downstream products for sugar. And I know when I was living in Guyana, I did some work on bagasse for filtration of water and also to replace cement in concrete. So
Okay.
those things, that I think, has been used in a lot of other countries. So I think that is an idea, that those areas I think the government should be involved in, because the research has been done. Right? All you have to do is to get it into Guyana within the context of Guyana.
Right.
And I think it's important. Right? Now, you mentioned about local partnership maybe developing. Do you have any international partners?
I'm not aware of any international partners specifically. I do know, maybe unless you count the Brazilians who they're working with on this new kind of variety. I know they are sourcing certain equipment, mechanized equipment from Brazil, because they again have a lot of experience. Their conditions are not exactly similar to ours, but they do have a lot of similarities, and therefore a lot of the equipment that is used in Brazil can also be used in Ghana. So there's some element of internationalism there.
How about India? Do you guys ever check India, because they have some?
Right. Yeah. Again, there have been Indian expertise involved in industry, I think, both to some extent now, but more in the past, especially in the research point of view, looking at, for instance, liquid fertilizers, which can be injected into the soil rather than being spread on the soil as you currently have with the solid sort fertilizers. I think, that is a discussion that is ongoing, and guys go to whether that can be feasible as a as a means to improve the productivity, the application of fertilizer, but also to prevent losses which you have when rain falls and so sometimes.
Mm-hmm. All right,
All right.
Ira, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Shamiza. You
No,
have any
thank
questions?
Thank you, Dr. Tara. We don't have too many questions. We have more suggestions, ideas, feedback. And our first one is coming from Ramona Kareem. She says, "It is my belief that the yield of the sugar estates must play the most important aspect with regards to profit. Packaging and attractiveness is secondary. The local market must first be satisfied. Subsidies have to stop except to enhance the enumeration of the workers. As it is, the cost of sugar for the average Guyanese is high." And then Mr. Lal says the sugar industry must survive, be sustained, and subsidized due to the social and economic significance historically, currently, and for the future. Ramon also says that the President Ali has, in so many ways, paid great attention to the needs of the ordinary people. Developments and modernization is taking place, but it is work that must be thoroughly studied to be feasible. And we will now ask you, Mr. Singh, for your closing remarks.
So thanks again. Let me express first or my appreciation and Gawu's appreciation for having us once again. I think this discussion on sugar is opportune. On Monday, we're observing. I think someone mentioned the historical linkages and of sugar, and national development and and even our independence and republicanism and all the things that followed. We're on Monday, we're observing the 77th anniversary of the Enmore martyrs, the 5 young men who were brutally gunned down in 1948, protesting and demanding their rights to be respected for a better life. So, it's one of the many ways that sugar has played an outstanding role in Guyana, and there's so many ways that we can describe it. So, I think this discussion on sugar is quite opportune right now. Of course, there are a lot of moving parts as we discuss in this quick. I would want to say a quick hour. But I think, the future is bright. There is a possibility for success. And I think, once we put our shoulders to the wheel, we can get there. So thank you once again.
Well said. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panel, Dr. Tara,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Gangaram Das, Professor Budu, and our guest tonight, Mr. Singh. To all our viewers, thank you for taking the time to be here this evening. Until next time, I am Shamiza Ali, and this is the Guyana Dialogue. Good evening, everyone.
Good
Good
evening.
evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aslim Singh.